Disclaimer: the following program is designed to offend, provoke, and challenge your religious sensibilities. It contains content that will likely offend anyone who holds religion sacred. This is for those with thick skin or a taste for the harsh truth. If you're easily offended or cherish your religious views, please turn off now. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. You have been warned. All right, today we're doing something long overdue. We're bringing Voltaire back from the dead. Not the watered-down Voltaire you see on classroom posters, not the polite little soundbite about tolerance. I'm talking about the man who opened the Bible, flipped to Genesis, and basically said, "Where the hell is Adam, and why does no one seem to care?" This isn't philosophy, this is arson. Voltaire didn't just critique the Bible, this guy ripped it apart with a smile and a footnote. And now, we're giving him the platform the church tried to bury. In this episode, we're breaking down Voltaire's chapter on Adam, line by line, page by page, highlighting the contradictions, mocking the logic, and letting the man drag Genesis like it owed him money. And let me tell you something, this guy is hilarious. He's turned out to be one of my very favorites, so I hope you like him as much as I do. We're using the William F. Fleming translation of the Philosophical Dictionary. Links down in the description. It's the best English version available, but fair warning, Fleming smooths out or summarizes parts, so if anything sounds too soft, trust me, Voltaire said it way meaner. But for the sake of the YouTube algorithm, this is the version I have to use. So grab your Bible, preferably one you don't mind throwing across the room, and welcome to the demolition. Genesis verse Voltaire. Adam doesn't walk away from this, and if you're into this kind of historical blunt force honesty, go ahead and like, comment, and subscribe. Voltaire's not done, and neither are we. It'll be covering a lot more of him in the future. All right, so this is where Voltaire opens with his takedown of Adam, and instead of retelling the usual Genesis bedtime story like some apologetics intern, he goes straight for the jugular. He says, look, everybody's been repeating the same tired stories about Adam, Eve, and the pre-human fiction, but he's like, hey, here's a new idea. What if nobody actually knew who the hell Adam was until way, way later? That's his setup. The supposed first man, the centerpiece of the human origin story, was such a well-kept secret that no one outside Palestine even heard his name until the Jews showed up in Alexandria and translated their scriptures. And even then, barely anyone noticed. Then he drops this little detail. When the Jews did finally translate their Bible into Greek, their own people lost it, like full-blown meltdown. You put Holy Hebrew into Gentile Greek? That's blasphemy. Burn the translation, curse the printer, call the rabbi. They got so hysterical that the Alexandrian Jews had to hide the whole thing just to avoid starting a religious brawl. Voltaire's point? This wasn't some global revelation. It was a family secret that accidentally leaked. And then he pulls in Josephus. You know, the guy apologists love to quote whenever they need a first century source to back them up. But even Josephus basically admits, we don't talk to foreigners. We don't write much. We just kind of keep to ourselves. Voltaire's like, well, there you go. That explains it. How can you pretend your origin story is universal when your whole cultural strategy is stay isolated, don't communicate, and definitely don't publish? He even takes a swipe at their literary output. 22 small books, he says, which, sure, sounds decent until you realize the Library of Alexandria had hundreds of thousands. This isn't some divine publishing house. This is a local zine with delusions of grandeur. And then we get to the real insult. They were profoundly ignorant of astronomy, geometry, geography, and physics. In other words, God supposedly picked a people to explain the origins of the universe, and they didn't even know how the universe worked. They couldn't chart the stars, couldn't map the earth, couldn't define a triangle, and were out here describing the sky like it was a tarp stretched over a flat disk. Voltaire's not just criticizing the story of Adam, he's showing how utterly implausible it is to claim this tribal, insular, barely literate group somehow received the one true history of the world and just forgot to tell anyone about it for 2,000 years. And the best part, he doesn't even raise his voice. He just calmly walks through the logic. Like, let's see, no one mentioned Adam, no one read about Adam, the people who wrote about him barely shared it. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Okay, so now Voltaire just keeps hitting the gas. He's not tiptoeing around it anymore. He straight up says no one on earth had ever heard of Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, or even Noah until the Hebrew writers finally decided to put it on record, not even a whisper. Nobody in Greece, Rome, Egypt, Persia, Babylon, or Syria was out there talking about the first humans. The only name that eventually made it out was Abraham, and even then, other cultures didn't connect him to the Jewish origin story at all. It was just, oh yeah, that guy, we've heard of him, not he's our ancestor too, which kind of wrecks the whole idea of a shared human origin, doesn't it? And then comes the line where Voltaire just laughs in the face of divine storytelling. Such are the secrets of providence that the father and mother of the human race have ever been totally unknown to their descendants. God allegedly created the first two humans and then just didn't tell anybody, not a whisper, not a memo, not even a cave drawing. It's like God invented humanity and then put the entire origin story on hold for 2,000 years. That's the joke. That's the whole point. You're supposed to believe Adam and Eve were the start of everything, and somehow every single civilization forgot until one tiny tribe wrote it down and said, hey everyone, we figured it out. And Voltaire's not even mad. He's just pointing out how wild it is that the authors of Mankind had such horrible global reach. And it gets worse. He points out that not even the most obsessive ancient writers, guys like Homer, Hesiod, or Orpheus, none of them ever mention Adam or Eve, which is wild because these guys wrote about everything, talking cows, incest gods, golden showers, you name it. But the literal origin of the entire human race somehow didn't make the cut. Guess it just slipped their minds. Then he drags Clement of Alexandria and Eusebius, these early Christian scholars who were basically scavengers for anything that could connect pagan myths back to the Bible. These dudes were so desperate to find Jesus in Greek poetry, they would have quoted a shopping list if it had the word apple in it. And even they found nothing about Adam or Eve. Not a hint. Not even a, hey, there's this weird garden story from the East. So Voltaire says what's now totally obvious, the names Adam and Eve were completely unknown to every other culture on the planet, which again is kind of a problem if you're claiming they're the source of everyone. And just when you think he's going to move on, he pivots hard to India. And this part is incredible. He goes, okay, fine, we do actually see something in Indian texts, Adamo and Prokriti. Sounds pretty close to Adam and Eve, right? The Brahmins didn't copy the Jews. In fact, they say the opposite. They say we were already here. We were building cities on the Indus and Ganges before your ancestors even figured out where Canaan was. They make it clear their Adamo isn't the Jewish Adam, and their Prokriti, who literally means life, isn't some post-rib sidekick. And their texts, older than anything in the Hebrew Bible, and even those are just commentaries on older texts. So Voltaire's message is coming together here. He's saying the Adam story isn't the original, it's just a cheap knockoff. The Jews weren't writing the first origin story, they were just borrowing and rewriting an older one late in the game, and then trying to act like everyone else was uninformed. And the way the Indians describe it, they're not even angry. They're just like, oh, cute, you have a story about the first man? That's adorable. We've had that for 1,500 years. Want to see our library? This page is so funny. Voltaire's just quietly dismantling the entire myth of biblical originality. He's not yelling, he's not mocking. He's just walking you through the evidence like, see this? See how no one knew about Adam? See how other people had better versions before him? Yeah, now go ask your pastor about that. Okay, now Voltaire shifts from calm academic takedown to full historical theater. He starts by circling back to the Brahmins just to rub it in one more time. He's like, by the way, you know what the Indians told European chaplains when they showed up with Bibles and rifles? They said, yeah, cool story. We've had our own version for over 1,000 years. It's older, better, and we didn't need colonizers to spread it. Basically saying, hey, well, thanks for the myth. Now kindly get off our spice rack. Then Voltaire brings in Sanchoniathon, a Phoenician historian who lived before Moses. This guy lists the first 10 generations of humanity, just like Genesis, but doesn't mention Adam, Eve, or Noah. His lineup includes people like Aeon and Halius. So either God handed out different caste lists depending on region, or somebody was making stuff up. And Voltaire's not done. He says we don't see Adam or Noah anywhere. Not in Egyptian dynasties, not on Chaldean records, not etched into stone or scribbled on clay. The whole ancient world silent, like they never existed. Which is pretty wild if you believe Adam fathered everyone and Noah rebooted the entire planet with a floating zoo. And here's where Voltaire drops the sarcasm nuke. It must be owned that such a silence is unparalleled, basically pointing out that this is the loudest historical omission in human history. Then he goes full mockery and reverence. He says, "Let us humble ourselves to the decrees of that providence which has permitted so astonishing an oblivion," which is 18th century for God really went out of his way to make sure nobody remembered his two most important humans. And he says that the names of the authors of mankind should be unknown to mankind is a mystery of the highest order. Voltaire's not just pointing out that there's already big problems here. He's saying the entire Adam narrative requires a miracle just to stay forgotten. Then he sets up the hypothetical, and this is prime Voltaire. He says, picture it. A Jewish trader rolls into Rome selling balm and casually tells Caesar and Cicero, "We all come from one man named Adam. Also, there was a worldwide flood, 8 people survived." And how does Voltaire imagine that going? Cicero and the Senate look at each other like, cool. Can we see your genealogical tree? And the guy pulls out this wild little chart. There's Adam, then 10 generations, then Noah, then us. And Voltaire knows, the Senate just isn't buying it. They're not nodding along. They're not converting. They're laughing out loud. So then Cicero leans in, totally deadpan, and asks the real question, where are the monuments, the scrolls, the temples? If the flood wiped out the world and Noah restarted it, why isn't his name carved on literally everything? Because, if this was real, you'd expect Adam and Noah to be the most famous names on earth. They'd be on temple inscriptions, city walls, street signs, even ancient lunch boxes. But instead, nothing. And then in stomps Voltaire, who imagines the Jew answering by saying, well, you didn't hear about it because we're pure and you're impure. That's the defense. Not evidence, not logic, just religious exclusivity. And Voltaire's final line is perfect. The Roman Senate would have laughed and the Jew would have been whipped. Because try selling divine genealogy to a Roman philosophy club with zero documentation and see how fast they introduce you to the business end of imperial discipline. Voltaire isn't just roasting the logic, he's exposing the complete ridiculousness of the claim itself. If Adam and Noah were real, world-defining figures, you wouldn't need scripture to know their names. They'd be everywhere, but they're not. And calling that absence a mystery isn't a defense, it's an accidental confession that the story doesn't add up. All right, this is where Voltaire stops even pretending to be polite. He opens with this about Madame de Bourgnon, a woman so devout she confidently claimed that Adam was a hermaphrodite. Why? Because God told her. Apparently, Voltaire doesn't even bother arguing. He just shrugs and says, God had revealed a great secret to her. But as I have not had the same revelation, I shall say nothing of the matter. Which is Enlightenment speak for she's making stuff up, but whatever, do you? Then he turns his attention to the Jewish rabbis, who didn't just read about Adam, they read Adam's own books. According to them, they know the name of Adam's teacher and even the name of his second wife. You heard that right. Second wife. Not Eve, the sequel. And again, Voltaire just lets it hang there and says, but as I have not read our first parents' books, I shall remain silent. He's not fighting the claims, he's just repeating them with a straight face and letting the audience do the math, which makes this whole thing even funnier. Then he goes back off on India because Genesis wasn't even first to market. The ancient Brahmins had Adamo and Prakriti, a begetter and a life giver, long before Adam and Eve ever showed up. And according to scholars, that's not a coincidence. They're saying the Indian stories came first and that the Jewish ones were basically the later, clunkier version. And Voltaire relays it with this brutal line. He says, the Indians were always inventors and the Jews always imitators. The Indians ingenious, the Jews rude. He's not pulling any punches, this guy. He's pointing out that the Hebrew creation story might have been a latecomer, patched together from older sources and repackaged with less imagination. Same thing we do today, really, especially me personally on my channel. Try to show the parallels between the stories. Then comes a line that's jarring to modern ears, but it's important to handle it directly. They say it is difficult to believe that Adam, who was fair and had hair on his head, was father to the N-word that I'm not allowed to say on YouTube, so go look at the book down in the description. Now, Voltaire isn't endorsing this language or this logic. He's reporting what others were saying at the time to highlight just how flimsy the whole Adam narrative becomes under scrutiny. The point they were making, ugly as it is, was this: if everyone supposedly came from a single man, why is there such extreme human diversity? Why do people across the world look radically different, from skin tone to hair texture to body structure? Voltaire's just handing them the mic and letting their own contradictions speak, and the implication is clear. If your origin story falls apart the moment you look outside your village, maybe it's not the universal truth you think it is. And now we meet Father Berruyer, a Jesuit priest, basically part of the church's intellectual special forces, who tried to take all these contradictions, all this myth-making, and make it make sense. He actually tried to harmonize the Bible with historical reason. And what happened? The book has been burned, but I am quite sure he had no such wicked end in view. So he's saying Father Berruyer, he tried to tell the truth. The church made sure no one ever read it. Well, guess what? After doing a little digging, it turns out the book still exists. Probably the one Voltaire's referring to is Histoire du Peuple Dieu by Father Berruyer, a multi-volume beast that tried to retell the Bible chronologically and rationally without skipping the awkward parts. And now I'm kind of dying to know what else is in there. If you'd be interested in a follow-up video where we crack it open and see what this poor Jesuit actually said that got his book condemned, banned, and burned, drop a comment. I haven't found an English translation yet, but I'll keep looking, because if this thing exposes the Bible just by explaining it plainly, you already know it's going on the list. Voltaire doesn't have to scream here. He's just laying it all out, like wild theological speculation taken seriously, ancient myths that predate the Bible, religious gatekeepers making stuff up and then punishing anyone who points it out. Voltaire doesn't rant. He just says, here's what they claim, here's what history shows, draw your own conclusions. And if you're watching this in 2025 and thinking, wait, why was I never told any of this? Yeah, that's the point. All right, now Voltaire's done shredding the external evidence. He's moving inside the story itself. And what does he find? Contradictions, censorship, weird theology, and a plot that sounds like it was written by committee. He opens by casually mocking the entire debate around whether Adam was infused with knowledge. Basically, whether he popped out of the dirt knowing math and animal names. Voltaire's take? Who cares? Anyone arguing about that probably didn't have any knowledge themselves, infused or acquired. So he's like, this debate is dumb, and so are the people having it. Then he admits something honest. We don't even know when Genesis was written. It's just as mysterious as the Vedam or ancient Sanskrit texts, except those actually admitted to being symbolic. Meanwhile, the Jews turned Genesis into scripture, but didn't even let people read the first chapter until they were 25 years old. So think about that. You're allowed to read Exodus, plagues, blood, murder, divine temper tantrums, but not Genesis 1, where God's just organizing furniture. Why? Because it's too miraculous, too contradictory, or too easy for a teenager to notice the nonsense? Voltaire suggests a few reasons, and they're all hilarious. First, maybe because man and woman get created twice, and they didn't want young people asking questions. Or maybe because God breathed life into Adam's face, and it sounded too physical. Or maybe because God pulls a rib out like it's Lego surgery, and a curious teen might actually count their ribs and notice they're all there. Or maybe, just maybe, it's because God is depicted walking around Eden at noon, cracking jokes after Adam screws up, and that kind of divine stand-up routine might make kids laugh instead of worship. Voltaire's like, you banned the wrong parts. If anything, Genesis 1 is the perfect kid's story, talking snakes, magic trees, sky domes, garden strolls. Kids would eat that up. But no, you banned it until they turned 25, and by then they had just enough sense to say, wait a second, none of this makes any damn sense. Then he throws in one last dry jab. We shall say nothing here of Adam's second wife named Lillah. Because yeah, Adam had another wife before or after Eve, depending on which rabbis you ask. According to Voltaire, her name was Lillah, and she's barely remembered, because even in mythology, women who weren't obedient enough tend to get erased. And Voltaire's closing line, it must be confessed that we know very few anecdotes of our family. That's his final smirk. After 5 pages of contradictions, missing records, copycat myths, cultural censorship, second wives, and forbidden chapters, he sums it all up with, we actually don't know a damn thing about where we came from. But hey, good luck building doctrine on that. And that's it. Voltaire doesn't shout, he just points out how fragile the whole structure is, how much it leans on legend, how scared it is of curiosity, and how badly it breaks under even the smallest questions. You couldn't ask for a cleaner ending to this commentary. The entire Adam narrative isn't just weak, it's a hand-me-down myth surrounded by caution tape, only allowed to be read after you're too old to laugh at it. So what did we learn? That the father of all humanity was unknown to all humanity. That the first man somehow left behind 0 records, 0 monuments, and 0 mentions until one isolated tribe scribbled him into history and claimed exclusive rights to human origin. That Genesis wasn't a divine revelation, it was a late-stage remix assembled from older myths delivered by a people who didn't know the shape of the planet or the existence of half its inhabitant. And Voltaire, he saw all of it. He called it out, his books were burned, his words were banned, and his name treated like heresy in every cathedral, but not today. Today, we give the man his voice back. If you want more chapters like this, more Enlightenment firepower, more sacred story demolition, drop a comment, share the video, or send it to your favorite theologian with a time-stamped "Explain This." And remember, if God wanted you to believe Adam was real, maybe he should have made him a little harder to forget. See you in the next one. Voltaire's just getting started.